A big thank you to the Iconic Officers team, to Michelle and to Christina for making this happen. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to be meeting with you all. So first and foremost, I always like to encourage the attendees and my guests to take down notes as much as you can. So whether you have a good old hard copy notepad on a notebook, or if you want to record it on your phone or your tablet, do take down notes. So you don't really have to take down notes from the slides itself, because we will send out the slides to you. But what you want to take down are things which actually are not on the slides itself. So if there's an idea or a concept that stood out to you, which really resonated with you at a point of time, you don't want to miss that moment. You want to capture it straight away. Okay. The next thing is do ask questions. So pop it into the chat box, or if you want to leave it till later, we'll spend some time to go through some questions, so you can unmute yourself and you can ask them and we can have a conversation over it. So use the chat box. There'll be some activities as we go along just to keep it interactive. So can I ask, where are you guys dialing in from? So just pop in your current location, just to see if we have any guests from maybe other parts of the world as well. Dublin, amazing. Oh, we have a guest from Germany. Dublin, okay. All right, beautiful. So from different places. So that's the wonders of technology. And Anna is dialing in from Indonesia. That's amazing. So thanks so much for joining us, whatever time zone you are. Hope you are staying safe and well, especially during these interesting times. Okay, cool. So there's going to be a lot of materials and content. So we are all in a treat. So where are you tuning in from? We've got that. The next thing I want you to do is, as we cover the materials, if you have, if what we've covered maybe on that particular slide, if that was an insight or revelation, I want you to pop in aha into the chat box. All right. So if it's something which you've learned for the first time, pop in aha. But if it's something which you've realized you've done wrongly for all this while, or if it's a wake-up call, or if it's a tight slap on your face, or if it's a reality check, you can pop in OMG, because I love to see how people react and respond to some of the concepts and ideas which we'll cover. So it's just good to get a sense of how you guys are taking things as we go along. Cool. So if you're just wondering about myself, let me just give you a bit of a background. So if you're wondering about my history and my credentials and all that. So I had a chance to speak on a TEDx stage twice in Melbourne 1 or 2 years ago, before the world went into lockdown and things changed a lot. I had a chance to speak around the globe, to travel around as an international speaker in 12 countries and in over more than 12 cities. So in the US, in New York, in Scandinavia, Copenhagen, Stockholm, Gothenburg, Helsinki, in northern and western part of Europe, and also of course in Dublin, where I met the team in person about 1 or 2 years ago. I think that was in Feb, and on different parts in Asia, and also in Melbourne, in Sydney, and also in Marrakesh, which is in Morocco, which is in the northern part of Africa. So my story and some of my work has been featured on different media outlets like entrepreneur.com, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald. I was a former infantryman back in the Singapore Armed Forces. I'm also an author, and I do love a lot of long distance running. So you can see here in terms of the distances, I ran a 100 km plus event 3 times, 50 km ultra marathons twice, and 6 full marathons in my life. So definitely it's very therapeutic for me, because I just love to go on these trail runs and just to get some space and just enjoy nature for what it is. I've also had a chance to coach different clients from organizations like EY, Deloitte, and ANZ Bank. I've also been rejected by employers 526 times over the course of 1.5 years. I did experience a degree of racism in my job search journey coming to Australia as an international student, and I was also fired from my first job out of university. So I must say that adversity is a great way for you to build up your resilience and your adaptability as well, because it's not just how you're able to bounce back, it's how you can get ahead of the game and to move forward despite the challenges. So I must also say that I'm who I am right now because of the challenges that I have been faced with and which life has thrown at me. So these are some of the organizations I've spoken with and some of the outlets I've been featured in. So top left-hand corner was me on the TEDx stage. Top right was with the Tesla ground level staff and mid-level managers in the Melbourne office. Bottom left-hand side is the Google office over in Singapore with some of the staff members there as part of their mental health and well-being series. And in the bottom right-hand side, it was a session, one of my favorite ones was in Marrakesh, where I was there in person as part of their African Youth Leadership Summit. So as much as I'm speaking a lot today, it's all about learning from one another because that is how we move things forward. That is how we succeed as a species. That is how we move civilization forward. All right. So there's a lot of things which I'm really keen to share with you all. So do take down as much notes as you can, absorb as much as you can, ask as many questions as you can. And so that is how we get the most out of today's session. So who is excited for today's event? So pop it into the chat box. So I'm going to get your fingers moving. All right, beautiful. Okay, cool. So that's really good to hear, and I'm really excited as well. Even though it's about 10 p.m., but I'm really fired up. So okay, so let's just jump into this. So a few things which we'll cover today. The first one is why do we need to pay attention to resilience and adaptability? All right. So what are the key drivers as to why this is so crucial and critical today? And then number two, we're going to talk about how to develop this kind of thinking skill to discern between the symptom and the problem. And you can use this when you are faced with challenges. So like the problems we have in life, is that really the problem or is that merely the symptom? All right. Number three, like mentioned in the event title, how can we think like Elon Musk? What are some of the mental models and the principles he used to tackle challenges? Number four, how to think like fighter pilots. So a lot of them, they actually have to make a lot of snap decisions in a fast-paced combat and dangerous environment. So how are they able to develop that kind of thinking agility, which we can use in different stressful and interesting situations as well? And last but not least is one of my favorite, which is how to disrupt yourself. So we live in a world of change and disruption. If you do not find ways or learn how to disrupt yourself, you are being exposed and you'll be very vulnerable to be disrupted by someone or something else. And if that does happen, it's usually more painful, all right, rather than you reinventing yourself. So what are some things which we can do? Okay, so the first one is this: why mental resilience and adaptability? So we live in a world that is changing really fast. You can see here, these are different products, services, inventions, technological marvels and devices, or you can call them inventions, and all that. So you can see them, and there is a timestamp at the bottom of each of them. So that is the time it takes for each product or gadget or device to acquire 50 million users. So if you can see here, airlines, it took 68 years to reach 50 million. The TV, 22 years, the computer, 14 years, YouTube and Facebook, 4 and 3 years respectively, and Pokemon Go, it just took 19 days to reach 50 million users. And for some of us who remember that game app, Angry Birds, I think they took about 30 plus to 34 days, if I'm not wrong. So it just shows that we live in a world that is always changing. The pace of change is increasing and the rate of change is increasing as well. So how change happens is not just linearly, it is changing exponentially. So therefore, it's even more important to stay ahead of the game by developing skills in terms of your resilience and adaptability. The next one is this, which I find really interesting. So 2020, It's a very interesting world which we never saw coming. So what happens on the internet within just 60 seconds, the internet minute? So you can see here, Google, 4.1 million search queries, Netflix, 764,000 hours watched in a minute. That's amazing. 1.1 mil spent online on e-commerce, 1.6 million swipes on Tinder, hopefully in the right direction, 190 million emails sent, so on and so forth, 4.7 mil videos viewed on YouTube. So you can see that there's an overload of information, but information is also readily available. So there's a lot of things happening in cyberspace, and therefore the pace of change is only going to increase. The next one is this. We live in a very complex and volatile world. Interesting because I've actually created this slide for a separate session that happened earlier this year in January, and I haven't changed this slide at all, and it's still relevant. Coronavirus, potential challenges or tension between the US and China, volatility and talks of a possible stock market crash or correction in Wall Street. In a point of time, I think there was some tension or incidents in, I think, Iraq or Iran, the Australian bushfires, which we're all concerned with over here, and then Brexit as well. So we can see that the world is very connected. It's becoming more and more borderless. When something happens on the other side of the world from where you are, when a politician or someone of influence does something or says something, there can be a ripple effect that can be felt all the way on the other side of the world. So when someone does something, there is a ripple effect that can be felt on the other side of the world. So this is why it's really important for us to stay in tune with what's happening, not to sink into negativity and hysteria, but just to have a sense of what's going on so that we can start to use different mental models and frameworks to unpack and to see the opportunities within. Okay, so I find this slide really interesting because this was something which, this was a resilience workshop which I had the opportunity to run over in National Australia Bank. I think it was in November 2017, so just 3 years ago. And you can see their lovely faces. They were all sitting closely together back then in the previous norm when we could have face-to-face events and activities. So everyone had a great time, and there were a lot of team building activities and tasks where they had to gather into groups and all that. So would really love to do that eventually once things go into the new normal. So so we had this session and it was really fun. And the interesting thing is that just about 1 or 2 weeks after I ran this workshop, this was what I saw in the news. All right. So National Australia Bank announced that they were going to cut 6,000 jobs over the next 3 years across the board. So you can call this divine, you can call this uncanny, you can call this interesting, you can call this coincidental, and all that. You can call this whatever it might be, but I find it really interesting because it wasn't planned at all. It wasn't, so it just happened that I had a chance to speak to them on resilience, because resilience and adaptability, it's not just a career skill. It is a life skill, because we never know what could happen around the corner. We never know what life could throw at us. So it's always good to be prepared, to be equipped, just in case things happen. All right. And if things happen, you're able to recover quickly and to course correct and to make good use of the opportunities within the crisis. Okay, and one of the last slides for this section is this. So we can see the average company lifespan on the S&P 500 index. So we can see back in the 1960s, the average lifespan was about 60 years, and it dropped in a wave-like fashion, fluctuating between 20 to 40 years. And I think right now it's all the way down between 10 to 20 years. So the life expectancy of companies is actually dropping because it's harder for them to stay in business, because times are really competitive. We live in a world that's hyper competitive, hyper distracted, and hyper commoditized. All right, so if you're taking down notes, you can write down hyper competitive, hyper distractive, and hyper commoditized. So there's a lot of alternatives, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of substitute or secondary products that can compete with your idea or with your business. So very important to adapt with the times and find your edge. Okay, cool. So any aha moments, or does this all make sense so far from the first part? So we've only scratched the surface. That's only the tip of the iceberg. Is everyone enjoying this so far? Okay, perfect. So thanks so much for that, Nicola. All right, so we're going to go into denser materials right now. So I can promise you that this is not an intellectual walk in the park. So this will definitely be mental gymnastics. So if you have to review some of this later, go ahead. But this is just to stretch our minds and our thinking. All right, so section number 2, symptom versus the problem. So can anybody tell me, so feel free to unmute your mic if it's easier rather than typing in it. What is the difference between a symptom and a problem? So sometimes it might be quite similar, but what do you think is the difference? Any ideas so far? Okay, so Nicholas said how it is viewed and perceived. Yep, so that is definitely one aspect to the difference. But if you're writing down notes, the biggest difference is that, okay, so Veronica says symptom could show that there is a problem coming. So that is very correct. All right, so that is spot on. So basically a symptom is a sign of the problem. All right, so like Veronica mentioned, it shows that there is a problem that exists. All right, so Vetty saying that symptom might be sneezing and the problem could be a cold. Yep, that's right. So the symptom is a sign or an indicator of a deeper problem, and the problem is the actual issue itself. Okay, so very, very big difference. So the next time you see a challenge, you can use this as one of your mental models or framework to start to dissect the issue. So is that really the problem, or is that merely the symptom? So let us go through some examples so that it will make more sense to all of us. Okay, so the symptom. All right, so some people might think that this is a problem, but it's actually maybe more of a symptom. So I worry about paying the bills. So if we put that in the symptom category, then what would actually be the problem? So in this case, we can see that the problem is actually not about the stresses of the bills, all right? That's the symptom, but the deeper problem is a lack of financial intelligence and a lack of income producing skills. Okay, so symptom versus problem. The next example, I struggle to get a job in this competitive market. So for some people, they might see that as the problem, but maybe it's actually just a symptom. So what's the real problem? So the real problem could be lack of differentiation and poor clarity on the person's competitive edge. So if you're unable to stand out from the crowd, if you don't know what really makes you tick and what point of difference you can bring to the table, then that is actually the bigger problem. Okay, so symptom, I don't have time to write my book. Okay, so can anyone tell me what could the actual problem be? If someone says that, you know, I think my problem is that I don't have time to write my book, or I don't have time to work on my business, I don't have time to go for that class, I don't have time to upskill myself. Anybody want to share with me what they think might be the true problem? Okay, so Nicholas saying, are you writing the right book? So clarity, that's one, that's correct. So Michelle saying fear. Okay, Vetty, poor time management, don't have enough interest or motivation. That is so true, and I agree with all of you. All right, so it could be poor time management, it could be a lack of drive or ambition, or having insufficient desire for it. And one thing which I thought of is the unstated or the unrecognized contentment with the status quo. So even though I might want to, even though I might say that I want to write a book, but maybe I have this deep-seated satisfaction that I'm okay with things being the way they are. And until and unless it is being addressed, nothing else will change. All right. So sometimes this is why using the symptom problem framework will allow you to dissect things. Because if you just talk about the book itself without addressing the root problems, then nothing much will change. All right. So the person might just skirt around the issue, but until you actually address and identify that it's maybe the person doesn't want it badly enough, doesn't matter whether it's a book or not, doesn't matter whether it's a side hustle or not. If the person is lacking the drive and the desire, you got to fix that first. All right. Then once that is done, then you can put the book on top of it. Okay, so symptom, I'm concerned about what others might think of me. So the problem could be things like having a shaky or an insecure self-esteem. So not being sure about yourself, not being comfortable in your own skin, or maybe even the wrong focus. So instead of focusing on what others might think of you, maybe you're paying too much attention on that instead of the goals which you should be achieving. Right? And it could be that you're hanging around the wrong crowd. So instead of hanging around people who try to drag you down, spend more time with people who encourage, inspire, and empower you. Okay. And the last one, my business is really struggling. So having a business that's struggling, that is not doing well, all right? So that could be a problem. But if we put that as a symptom, what could be the problem? So the problems could be having poor competitive edge, playing too small in the marketplace, myopia, so not seeing the bigger scheme of things, not thinking long term, all right? That means you're just playing on a month-to-month basis instead of having a far-reaching goal or vision, or having, or more practically, having a weak sales and customer pipeline. All right, so there's a big difference between symptoms and problems. So you can use this when you face challenges, all right, just to start to dissect things. All right, cool. So we've got some aha moments here. All right, beautiful. Cool. So the next section, which will continue to work on our brains and our minds, is how to think like Elon Musk. So Elon Musk is pretty much, we can say that he's like the modern day Iron Man, or like the modern day Leonardo da Vinci. So I think he's like a polymath. He's skilled in different things. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, Solar City, and everything else, wanting to put uh, humankind on Mars, wanting to revolutionize the transport industry or the energy sector itself. So definitely he's a visionary, but he's also an executioner. He's willing to do whatever it takes to make things happen. But how does he think? All right, so that is what we want to learn today. So he's seeing lots of problems in the world. So things like energy insecurity or energy issues, climate change affecting the livability of us as a species on planet Earth. So these are very complex and hairy issues, and he has to tackle all of this sometimes at the same time. So what is one framework which he uses? So let me share with you, all right? So it is this thing called first principles thinking. So what do we mean by this FPT, first principles thinking? So it means that, so first principles is basically a physics way of looking at the world. All right, so looking at things physically. And what it really means is that you boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and then you reason up from there. So it's basically looking at a complex, hairy issue, and you break it down into its constituent parts, and you work your way up from there. All right. So let me just go through this again. Look, it's a physics way of looking at the world. So you boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and then you reason up from there. Right? So break it down first, and then you build things up from there. Let me just give you some examples on how this can be applied. So analogy versus first principles. So a lot of people think in terms of analogy. So they have a picture of or an idea or a concept in their mind. So for example, a lot of people think that electric cars will never work because the batteries are too expensive. Might be true, might not be true. Maybe they are right, maybe they are not. But who knows, all right? But when we see it through the lens of first principles, we ask ourselves questions like, what are the constituent parts of a battery? So different materials, aluminum, nickel, copper, cobalt, and all that. And what are the spot prices for those raw materials? And so what if we got them from cost efficient sources? So if the raw materials are already quite cheap, then the other factor is the assembly and the labor cost. And if you can lower the price from that, you actually realize that making batteries for electric cars isn't as expensive as most people think of it to be. Right? So this is how first principles can be used. The next one is this, right? A lot of people think that running a business takes a lot of money and it is very risky. So depending on the business as well, so it's a huge overarching statement. All right. And for you guys, some of you might be running your own startups or your own enterprises and all that. So which you're able to relate to this, and you might actually see that it's not really true. Because does it really take a lot of money? So how much? So if we look at it from a first principles perspective, we ask ourselves questions like, how much does an e-commerce business require to start up? So if you're not looking at a brick and mortar store, you just want to sell stuff, products and services online, does it require much money to start things? Not really. Maybe you just need some web hosting, you need a website, you need some graphic design, or you can just pop some stuff on eBay or Amazon or Etsy itself, maybe Shopify as well. So the platforms are all there. You just pay the monthly subscription fee rather than leasing a shop space. Right, so you don't really need that much money. And then drop shipping allows us to gauge demand before we provide the supplies. So if you're selling like t-shirts, drop shipping, which means that you get your customers to express their interest first, then you go print the t-shirts, not the other way around. So you gauge the demand first, then you provide the supply. And then if you really need the money, you can actually bootstrap and run a very lean business. So there is no need to mortgage the house. There's no need to go into huge debt just to start a business. So you can start with very little money down, right? So this is the power of first principles. So you break something down into its constituent parts, into its little bits and pieces, and then you start to assemble them in a way that makes sense to you, okay? Okay, so let us go to the next one. Okay, so let us put this into practice. So if we ask ourselves this question, what are some of the business and employment opportunities in the pandemic? Right? So this is something which a lot of people can't grasp or can't grapple with, because if they look at the pandemic itself, they just freak out. Their mind just spirals into fear and hysteria because the mind isn't trained to make sense of the chaos. All right, so let us use first principles to address this. Okay, so one of the questions which we can ask is, what are some of the industries which are still hiring or are still moving or are still in business during this pandemic, right? Because once again, the question is, what are the business and employment opportunities, all right? So if we ask ourselves the question of the industries which are still alive, that is a good start. Then the next question which we can ask is, what sells and brings in the money? So what are some products and services which we can sell to bring in some cash, right? And then in order for the cash to come in, there has to be a demand. So what do people want or need now, right? And then you break it down even further. What do they still need to do in the pandemic? right? So people are still around. You don't see them on the streets, but they're still around, and they still need to go about their lives, all right? Even though it's a different normal right now. And then you might start to deduce this. So they will still need to eat, still need to sleep, still need to work, still need to be entertained and all that, right? So from here, you can start to suss out the opportunities. And if we dig even deeper, we'll find out that because people are at home, they'll need food and supplies. They're at home, they'll need office equipment because they're working from home. They'll need virtual tools like Skype, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, um, they need Slack, Salesforce, and all that. They'll still need to be entertained just to stay sane. They'll need DIY tools if they want to work on their backyard or their front porch. Um, they still need childcare because the kids still have to be taken care of. They'll need pet care as well. Someone has to take care of the resident cat or the dog, so on and so forth. All right. So we can also slowly deduce that the businesses and industries which are kind of pandemic and recession resistant. All right. So based on what we've seen so far, we can say that, or we can actually come to um, an estimation that most likely food industries will still be around. Why? Because people still need to eat. Education will still be around because people still need to learn and study and upskill themselves. Discount retail is an interesting one because especially during an economic recession, people are tighter with their budgets. So things like Costco or Walmart or those equivalents, they will still be around because they can service the masses. Healthcare, pharmaceuticals, of course, accounting for businesses, and for personal finance. Transportation, telecommunications, you still want to stay in touch with people. Utilities, you still got to keep the electricity, the water running. Alcohol and tobacco, it's interesting because if times are good, people might drink to celebrate. If times are bad, people drink out of stress. And also physical and cyber security. So physical security because people are at home, cyber security because businesses are virtualized. So a lot of e-commerce happening. So you got to guard that space as well. So through through different reasoning and deductions, we can actually use first principles to start to make sense. So initially, looking at the pandemic, looking at COVID-19, looking at the lockdown, it can feel very overwhelming and daunting. You know, like what am I going to do with my business? Who can I serve? Or where am I going to find work and employment? But once you do this, you start to see that there are actually opportunities. There are different avenues for you to explore only if you take the right time and use the right skills to dissect the problem. Okay. Okay, so everyone's brain doing okay right now? If you're still alive, pop in yes. Okay, cool. Because it takes, okay, so your cognitive functions are still functioning. That's really good. I'm really happy to hear that. So we have more meat to consume. All right. So thinking like fighter pilots, this is something which, coming from a military background, I can totally relate to because this is a thinking framework which can be used in very high-paced and high-stressed environments. So thinking like fighter pilots. So let me introduce you to this thing called the OODA loop. OODA loop. So the OODA loop was developed by a US Air Force colonel who's also a military strategist, and his name is John Boyd. So I think he was a fighter pilot himself, and he needed a way to be able to make decisions literally on the fly or on the go in a high stress, high stakes situation where you don't really have time to sit down and ponder, workshop, and brainstorm, right? So he came up with this framework, and let us just go through it. Okay, cool. So there are four parts: observe, orient, decide, and act. Okay, so observe, orient, decide, and act. So observe is basically you gathering information. It's you looking at the world, all right? So if you're looking at the forest, what kind of plants are there? What kind of animals are there? Scan your surroundings, the sights, the smells, the noises, the sounds, and all that. So look around you, look within you, look beyond you, right? So just activate your senses and make sense of just get as much input as you can, all right? So that is just observe. The next one is more interesting. This is where you use more thinking. So it is you applying your worldview, your mental model, or your perspective to what you have observed so far, right? So this is you processing that information, making sense of things, using destructive deduction and creative induction. So those are basically fancy terms, meaning that you just break things down and then you build them back up to make sense of them, right? So if you are in a jungle or in a forest, you observe the scenery, right? So is it pouring? Is it rainy? Are there a lot of trees? Are we close to a water source? Is there food supply? Are there fruits which are edible and all that? And then you orient yourself. You start to process the information. So you start to think about, okay, so how can I survive now? All right. How can I find help? How can I get rescued? All right. So you start to process things. And then the next one is you deciding things. So coming up with your hypothesis or your theory. So making best guess and taking calculated risk. So looking at the forest, if you notice that there's a river, right, you might come up with the hypothesis that as long as you follow the river, you might end up in civilization, right? So that is your theory, but once again, it is not tested yet. So that's why we have the next part, which is to act or to test that hypothesis, right? Which is where you execute, you take action, right? So observe, orient, decide, and act, right? So observe, you realize that you're in a forest. It is densely populated, lots of plants, trees, shrubs, and all that, maybe some predators. You orient, so you make sense of it. Can you survive? How long can you survive? How long can your supplies last? Where can you find food, shelter, and all that? Decide. So does this lead? Sorry, does this river actually lead to civilization? And then you act on it, right? So the interesting thing about this is that it doesn't just go linearly in one direction. It's actually this. That's why we call it the OODA loop. So you observe, you orient, you decide, and then you act. And then when you decide, sometimes based on your decision, you might go back to observing again, or even when you orient, you can go back to observing again. And then when you act, you might learn new things, and then you might observe again, right? So for example, back to the forest example, um, if you decided that you want to test that following the river might lead to civilization, and after a while you might see that it's actually leading to the open ocean. All right, so you've tested your hypothesis, which means that you've gone into the wrong direction of the river, and then you have to observe again. So where is it going upstream? And then you orient yourself, and then you make the decision, and then you go for it. Okay, so let me give you one more example. So for example, if you are working with a company and they've made the announcement that they are going to let go 1,000 staff in the next 6 months, right? So this is your observation. This is the piece of information that you have to come to terms with, right? And then you orient yourself to it. So you start to process the information, you start to chew on it. You ask yourself questions like, is my role safe and essential? How risky is my position? And then you tell yourself, I have strong connections and robust transferable skills. Okay, so you're starting to make sense of things, and then you go into decision mode. So you might come up with theories like, my role could be okay, but what if I'm wrong? All right, you might also say that I'm sure there are there are other opportunities out there. I just have to look around and ask around, right? So these are your theories. It is still untested until you take action. So what I'll do is maybe I'll spend a couple of hours a week just to scan the job sites, have a sense of what's going on in my space and in my industry, read different reports, and touch base with my connections. Right? So you can see how this leads from one to another, right? Because most people, without a proper mental framework, if they just receive the news that the employer is going to let go of at least 1,000 staff, most people will just freak out. They will just freeze. They won't know what to do. They'll just panic, and then they will just spread the fear and hysteria amongst their peers, all right? But people who are successful, they're able to calm their emotions, to regulate their feelings and all that, and to also look at the problem objectively and to apply different principles and frameworks to dissect it and to actually see the opportunities and to come up with an action plan. All right, so this is how you can use the OODA loop to your advantage. And I can see a lot of aha moments. That's really good. Okay, so one of the last few sections, and this is something which I'm also really excited about, which is how to disrupt yourself. So we know that we live in a world of change and disruption. So how do you maintain your competitive edge? What are some things which you can do just to stay ahead of the curve, all right? To make sure that you're always on your toes, that you're always putting yourself on the forefront, okay? So, oh, okay, so this one. So let me introduce you to this thing called the S curve. I'll pop it into the chat, the S curve. Okay, so basically the S curve is something which you can apply to many aspects of life. So the vertical axis is growth and performance, the horizontal axis is time. So whether you are learning a new skill, whether you are familiarizing yourself to a new environment, or you're starting a new job, you're working on a new project, pretty much a lot of things in life, they follow the S curve, all right? So what this means is, at the start, when you start doing something, you are in the inexperience or infancy space, all right? And then once you've gained a level of competency and confidence, you move into engagement and development. So this is when things really start to pick up. And then after a while, when you hit the threshold, or when you hit critical mass, you start to go into the mastery or maturity phase. So for example, for those of us who know how to drive, just recall the time when you were taking your driving license, right? You're going for your driving classes. So at the start, in infancy, you haven't touched the car before. The first time you sat in the driver's seat, looking at the dashboards, the dials, the indicators and all that, it looks very unfamiliar and even very daunting. So this is where it's the inexperienced phase. So after a period of time, there is only marginal growth, right? But if you consistently go for your lessons, you keep pushing yourself to learn, and you have the discipline to upskill yourself, what happens is that you start to move into the engagement phase, which is where you start to become more familiar with the vehicle, you start to change gears more smoothly, you're more confident changing lanes, doing the parking instead of always bumping and hitting the curb and all that. Or even stalling the car when you're trying to shift gears. So this is when you're in the engagement phase. And after a while, when you are finally ready for the driving exam, you're most likely in the maturity phase. So this is when you can change lanes without you thinking too much. It comes as second nature to you. When you're driving, you can even have a conversation with the instructor. So it's almost like you can do it subconsciously, right? So S curve. So pretty much whatever skill or things which you are trying to learn for the first time, we usually go through this S-curve journey, right? So at the start, there's only marginal improvement. You can see by these yellow or golden arrows. But in the middle, that is when things start to accelerate, right? It starts to make sense. It starts to become very fun and engaging. And towards the end, all right, you are really an expert in your craft. So the change of performance is not too much, right? So for us who have been in your job or in your industry or in your space for a while, if you have attained a level of expertise, that's really good. So you're most likely in the mastery phase. But remember, there is a danger and there are risks if you stay there too long. So the risk is complacency and stagnation, right? So you just going through the motions of things, even though you are very comfortable and familiar with it, you just going through your job or your daily life, day in and day out and all that. So you're most likely stuck in your little bubble, you're in your comfort zone, things are really fine, but there isn't much growth. And this is actually really dangerous because all it takes is for someone to be able to do the job more effectively and more efficiently, and then that person might be able to disrupt you. So you might be asking, what can I do in this case? So there is something which you can do to this S-curve to disrupt yourself constructively. So what you can do next is this. You can literally introduce a new S-curve, right? So where the S-curve ends for the old curve, where it ends for the old S-curve will be the beginning of the new S-curve. So the maturity for the old S-curve will be the infancy of the new S-curve. Okay, so it's pretty much stacking your S-curves or stacking your skills, so to speak. So it could be something like this, like Veronica mentioned, yes, so start learning something new. So whenever you've reached a level of expertise, make sure you do something which is also aligned to your core skills, so that you are always a beginner. All right, you're always adopting this beginner's mentality in the things that you do. Okay, so literally stacking things. So for example, if you're a marketing professional, all right, you've been doing social media stuff and all that, what are some things you can do? So for example, you can take on the Google Analytics short course just to upskill yourself. And then after that, you can go into some copywriting, right? Understanding how to use words to sell. And then once you're familiar with that, you can go into consumer psychology, because you can now understand how your customers think, what triggers them, what motivates them, what gets them to take action. And you can see that all these are very stackable and they are all complementary, supporting and aligned to your core marketing expertise. Right? So try to identify different skill sets or different things which you can learn or pick up to continue to stack upon your existing primary skill set, right? So this is how you can use the S-curve idea or concept to disrupt yourself and to innovate. Right, so this is an example of a lady who have extended her S-curve, all right? So she's found the next step in her journey. So this 85-year-old lady studying AI and humans in the workforce. So you're never too young, you're never too old, it's never too early, it's never too late to learn something new. So if she's able to pick up AI, um, this means that we are also more than able to learn new things and to disrupt ourselves constructively. All right, so the big question you need to ask yourself, and I'll pop it into the chat, is what is your next S curve? Okay, so this is the question which we always need to ask ourselves. So when things seem fine, when things are going smoothly, when we are really comfortable with what we're doing, we need to ask ourselves, what is the next step, all right? So what's the next level we can achieve? What is our next S curve, all right? Okay. So I think we are going towards the end of the content, and I just want to leave this quote by Mark Twain with you, right? So he says, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Because at the end of the day, the greatest pain in life is the pain of regret, right? So it's not really the pain of failure. It's not the pain of experimentation. It's not the pain of disappointment. It's not the pain of rejection, right? It's actually the pain of regret, because eventually we'll all grow old. We'll all die. So you don't want to be that 60, 70, or 80-year-old person lying on their deathbed or sitting on their rocking chair, looking back when we had the chance and the opportunity to pursue those opportunities, right? So whatever you have ahead of you right now, seize the moment, seize the opportunities, make things happen, and just go for it. So thanks so much for joining us for today. Really lovely to meet with you all. So hopefully once things ease up and the restrictions retract, we'll be able to meet one another face to face. That'll be great in the near future. So thanks so much for attending this. Do send us your feedback if there's anything which you would like us to cover, what you thought about this session as well. So apart from this, stay safe, take care, All our love, blessings, and regards from Australia to you guys. And then we'll see you all next time.